Have you ever stopped to truly consider what it means to age with grace, with purpose, with a sense of inner peace? What happens when you find yourself facing the inevitable currents of time, grappling with loneliness, the sting of loss, and the quiet echoes of solitude? This video isn't just about getting older. It's about embarking on a profound journey of embracing these later years of life and living them fully, intentionally, and with a heart full of wisdom. You're about to meet Jack Thompson, a 62-year-old man who has navigated the highs and lows, the joys and heartaches that accompany aging. From the profound grief of losing his beloved wife to the increasing isolation as his children forge their own paths, Jack's story is deeply personal, yet resonates with the universal human experience of growing older. Now, why should you stick around and watch this video until the very end? Because Jack's experiences are a reflection of what many of us will inevitably face. Through his journey, you'll uncover how to navigate the pain of loss, how to forge new connections, and how to build a fulfilling life, even in solitude. You'll discover the invaluable wisdom he gained from unexpected encounters and the quiet strength he found within himself. You'll also reflect on difficult decisions many seniors must make, such as choosing whether or not to move to a nursing home, and how to approach such decisions with confidence and an open heart. By the end of this video, you'll walk away with a deeper understanding of how to cherish the relationships that truly matter, how to embrace independence, and how to take full control of your own life as you grow older. Whether you are in your 30s, 60s, or beyond, Jack's story will remind you to live your later years in a meaningful way. Don't miss this opportunity to gain valuable insights from someone who has lived through it all and emerged, if not unscathed, then stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Pause. And before we continue, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of my videos. Your support helps me continue to share these important stories and ideas. And if anything in this video resonates with you, please leave a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to comment "Oh" to let me know how I can improve. Now, let's dive into Jack's story. Jack's story begins not in his youth, but in what he thought was the serene landscape of retirement. He had meticulously planned for this time in his life, envisioning days of leisurely pursuits, travel, and time to connect with his loved ones. Like many of us, he had focused on financial stability, diligently saving for that rainy day. He was prepared for the material aspects of aging, but there was one thing he hadn't planned for: the heavy silence that began to fill his days. His children, Adam and Emily, now had their own families and flourishing lives. A part of him longed for the days when his home was bustling with the sound of laughter and the patter of little feet. But over time, the energy slowly dissipated, and the once vibrant house grew increasingly quiet. Years prior, his beloved wife, Sarah, had passed away after a long illness. That loss had left a gaping hole in his heart, a wound that seemed to resist any attempt to heal. As time passed, his children, once so close, became more absorbed in their own busy lives, their visits becoming less and less frequent. With each passing day, Jack found himself alone more often than not. One afternoon, sitting on the sofa, surrounded by the stillness of his empty house, the silence seemed to swallow him whole. The only sounds were the beating of his own heart and the distant hum of the world outside. The rooms, once filled with life and warmth, now seemed to echo the loneliness he felt deep within his bones. A pang of bitterness he couldn't ignore settled in his heart. He was trying to push those feelings aside when the phone rang. It was Adam. His voice was hurried, urgent. He explained, with a tone of worry, that he might not be able to come by. Jack felt a flicker of disappointment, but he forced himself to suppress it. He knew Adam had his own life, his own responsibilities. He didn't want to burden him with his loneliness, so he replied with forced calmness, "It's fine, Adam. Don't worry about me. Just take care of your things. I'm all right here." He hung up, feeling a hollow ache inside. It was as if the world had slipped away, leaving him behind. He had worked so hard, poured his heart into providing for his family, only to find that now, with Sarah gone and his children living their own lives, he was left to face the quiet solitude alone. And that solitude seemed to grow more profound each day. The following day, Jack's neighbor, John, stopped by. They were around the same age, and they'd always enjoyed their conversations. But this time, there was an unspoken heaviness in the air. John sat down beside him, and after a moment of silence, sighed deeply. "So, it's just you here now, huh?" he asked, looking around the room. His eyes scanned the emptiness that mirrored Jack's own feelings. Jack nodded, without saying much. John's words hung in the air like a weight. "Same for me," John continued, his voice tinged with sadness that struck Jack to his core. "My wife is busy, and the kids are doing their own thing." Jack felt the sorrow in John's words mirrored the aching emptiness within him. John's words about loneliness at this stage of life felt like a cold, hard truth Jack couldn't escape. You have to think about it. What if one day you're all alone? John asked, his question cutting through the stillness like a knife. Jack felt his heart sink. The thought of being completely alone, in this large house, with no one to talk to or check in on him, filled him with dread. The question echoed in his mind, what if I'm left alone? What will I do? He tried to shake it off, but the fear lingered, a haunting presence. A few days later, Emily came by with her son, Noah. She brought some of his favorite childhood dishes, perhaps hoping it would lead to a longer visit. But as soon as she stepped through the door, she rushed to explain, "Dad, I'm just dropping by to let Noah see you for a bit, but then I have to go pick up Tom." Her hurried tone, her eyes darting back and forth, and the worried look on Noah's face broke Jack's heart. He tried to smile, to hide the ache in his chest, but it was impossible. "Go ahead. Take care of what you need to do." "I'm fine here," he said, though the words felt empty. Emily barely had time to sit down before she was rushing out the door with Noah in tow. Jack stood at the door watching them leave, the sound of their footsteps slowly fading away. The house felt even emptier now, the silence more oppressive. He couldn't stop the tears that welled up in his eyes, or the feeling of abandonment that settled heavily in his heart. That night, lying in bed, the earlier question echoed in his mind with painful clarity. What should I do if I'm left alone? He knew he couldn't continue like this, drifting through his lonely existence. He had to do something. And as he lay there, he remembered the teachings of the Buddha on impermanence, that everything changes, everything passes. This wasn't an invitation to despair. It was a call to action. It was a realization that he was the only one who could change his situation. He began to see the silence not as a void, but as an opportunity for self-reflection, to begin the journey of understanding the true nature of existence and finding peace within. He knew that the true practice of Buddhism wasn't about withdrawal from the world, but a deeper engagement with it, one rooted in compassion, awareness, and the pursuit of inner peace. A few days later, Jack met up with John at the park for a walk. They sat on a bench, watching people go by. He turned to John, his heart heavy. "You're right about everything," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. At our age, if we're left alone, how do we manage?" John nodded. "I've thought about it too. There are a few things we need to prepare for in advance. We can't wait until the last moment to worry, John said firmly, his voice almost reassuring. "The most important thing is to make sure we're financially stable. We need enough to cover food and essentials, so we're not left struggling." Jack nodded in agreement. Without financial security, aging could become a brutal battle. With no spouse or kids nearby, it's up to us to take care of ourselves, John continued. Those words rang true. Jack felt a surge of determination. Maybe the future didn't have to be so bleak. Maybe there was still time to prepare, to take control, to build a plan that would allow him to live out his later years with dignity and purpose. But it was clear. He had to act now before the silence became more than he could bear. He understood that, according to Buddhist principles, suffering arises from attachment and craving. He knew he couldn't cling to the past, the family he once had, or the imagined future. He knew the key was acceptance and action. As a Buddhist practitioner, Jack knew that all suffering stems from attachment, from clinging to things as permanent. But this wasn't about denying his pain. It was about facing it, understanding it, and ultimately, finding a path to peace, even in the face of loss. He decided he would no longer let life dictate him. It was time to take the reins. Living alone, you come to realize that despite all the love and care from your children, they can't always be there when you need them most, he shared with John. It's a hard truth, one that hits you like a cold gust of wind. We have to become more independent, John stated firmly. We have to take care of ourselves, stay active, and never isolate ourselves. It was as if John was speaking directly to Jack. He had been practicing mindfulness meditation for years, attempting to cultivate an awareness of the present moment. Now he realized it was time to put that practice to the test. He needed to not only be aware of his feelings, but also to actively engage with them, to understand them without being overwhelmed by them. For so long, he had devoted his life to his family, putting their needs first, but he had neglected the quality of his own life. The years had passed, and all he had to show for it was a life spent in front of the television, in a room that felt more like a prison than a home. The isolation was slowly taking its toll. The realization struck him. He couldn't keep living this way. His health, his happiness, everything depended on him changing. So, he chose to change his habits. Each morning, he started walking to the park, a small step, but a step toward regaining control. In the evenings, he found solace in the community center, playing chess and chatting with other seniors. At first, it was awkward, and he felt the pull of loneliness, but he gradually built new friendships. Life began to feel richer, more fulfilling. He learned to focus on the small joys, the simple pleasures, the warmth of the sun on his face, the gentle breeze, the laughter of others, the challenge of a good chess game. These moments became his refuge, his reminders of the beauty and simplicity that still existed in the world. This was an active application of the Buddhist concept of right mindfulness, where one is fully aware and present in each moment, accepting it without judgment, as it is, not as we wish it would be. Still, there was an emptiness that refused to go away. Every night, as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the question haunted him: who will be there for me when I'm sick? When I need someone to talk to? Or help me through hard times? The silence amplified his fears. He couldn't shake the thought that maybe he needed someone by his side, not to take care of him, but to simply be there, to share the quiet moments and the burdens of getting older. But a wave of guilt would wash over him. How could he betray Sarah's memory? How could he ever let go of her presence? Yet, as much as he tried to ignore it, the loneliness grew stronger each day. It was a subtle yet profound experience that challenged his understanding of love, loyalty, and the natural rhythms of life. He couldn't deny the pull of human connection, the inherent need we all have to share our lives with others. One day, after much hesitation, he found the courage to talk to John. John listened with a knowing look. "I get it," he said softly. "After my wife passed, I felt the same way. We don't need someone to depend on, but someone to talk to, someone to share the highs and lows of life with, someone to support us when we need it." John's words gave Jack a comfort he hadn't realized he was missing. He realized that he wasn't looking to replace Sarah, but simply to ease the ache of solitude that had been growing inside him. He began to open his heart to the idea of companionship. And that's when he met Margaret. He understood that even though Sarah had moved on, she had left an indelible mark on his heart, and that their love was not replaceable. Margaret wasn't meant to be a replacement for Sarah. She was going to be another chapter in his life's journey. Margaret was also a widow living alone. Her vibrant, optimistic personality was a breath of fresh air. They quickly bonded over their shared experiences, the deep loneliness that came with children living far away. Margaret had a spirit of adventure, a zest for life that Jack hadn't felt in years. Her presence brought joy back into his life. Their conversations, filled with laughter and understanding, became something he looked forward to every day. As time went on, their relationship deepened. They began doing more together: grocery shopping, cooking meals, taking walks. They never labeled their connection, and they didn't need to. The bond they shared was enough. Margaret became his companion in every sense of the word, and their home, which had once felt so empty, was now filled with warmth, conversation, and the gentle rhythm of two lives intertwined. He had learned about metta, the Buddhist concept of loving kindness. With Margaret, he realized what a powerful force it is when shared. It's not about romantic love, but a general sense of warmth and compassion towards others. It's a way of experiencing the world that is open and inclusive, something he had found in his new connection with Margaret. One night, when Jack fell ill with a fever, he was reminded of just how much having someone by your side can mean. Margaret was there instantly, her concern shining through every gesture. She rushed to get medicine, cooled him with a damp cloth. She called Adam, urging him to take Jack to the hospital. When Adam arrived and saw Margaret so diligently caring for Jack, he was surprised. But Jack reassured him. "I didn't want to worry you. You've got your own life, and Margaret takes excellent care of me." Adam seemed torn, but his gratitude was clear. That night, as Jack lay in bed, watching Margaret take care of everything, he realized the house was no longer just a place where he existed. It had become a home filled with love, tenderness, and companionship. The emptiness that had once defined his life had been replaced by something more meaningful. The house felt warmer and more vibrant, filled with not just material possessions, but something much deeper and richer. It had become a sacred space of connection and shared life, an embodiment of the Buddhist concept of Sangha, a community that offers support, warmth, and growth. He realized that the companionship they shared wasn't about replacing what he had lost, but about finding a new kind of love, one that was quiet, steady, comforting. It wasn't the passionate love of youth, but a love that brought peace, security, and warmth to the twilight of their lives. Margaret was no longer just a companion. She was a light that had pierced through his darkness. She was a reminder that even in old age, we don't have to be alone. But then the complexities of life unfolded in unexpected ways. They had both understood the essence of anicca, the Buddhist idea of impermanence, that nothing stays the same. They knew their relationship was also subject to change, just like everything else in life. And when that change came, they both knew it was necessary to embrace it with grace and understanding. One day, while quietly going about their routine, Margaret received a phone call that would change everything. Her son was getting married, and he wanted her to come back and live with him and his new family. When Margaret shared the news, a surge of bitterness flooded Jack's heart, but he fought to keep his emotions in check. He smiled, trying to mask the sadness that was slowly consuming him. "Your son is getting married. That's wonderful news. It's a good time for you to be with your children," he said, trying to sound supportive. But as Margaret looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. He could see the internal battle within her. "But I've gotten used to being here with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words hung in the air like an unspoken plea. The quiet intimacy of their life together had become a comfort to both of them, and the thought of being uprooted stirred a deep ache within him. This moment also allowed him to practice the Buddhist principle of upekkha, equanimity. It was hard to not be disappointed, but he knew that to practice loving kindness and non-attachment was to honor and support Margaret's decisions, even when they didn't align with his own desires. Taking a deep breath, Jack tried to steady his thoughts, knowing he needed to make this easier for her. "You need to be with your son. As a mother, that's where you belong. I'll be fine here on my own. Don't worry about me," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. Inside, the weight of those words felt like a heavy stone in his chest. He wanted her to stay, to hold on to the warmth of their shared time. But he knew, deep down, that this was what she needed. After days of quiet contemplation, Margaret decided to return to her son. Jack drove her to the bus stop, his heart a mixture of love, sadness, and resignation. As the bus pulled away, he felt as though a piece of his heart was being left behind, leaving him in a hollow emptiness. Returning to his empty house, the silence was deafening. It was a loneliness he hadn't anticipated, a feeling more profound than he could have imagined. The realization that life is constantly changing and that the present moment is all we truly have became clearer to Jack. It was a difficult truth to face, but he was determined to embrace it with grace and courage. He found himself grappling with the reality that many elderly people face: solitude. The thought of being alone in his later years began to seep into his mind. Tears welled up as he muttered to himself, struggling to make sense of the void. Margaret's departure had left a hole that nothing seemed to fill. Each morning, he continued with his routine, exercising and meeting with old friends, but the absence of her companionship was palpable. His children, Adam and Emily, still checked in on him, but their lives were full, and he didn't want to burden them with his loneliness. They had their own families and responsibilities. Every time they called, he reassured them, saying he was fine, but he felt the painful truth. The loneliness was sinking deeper into his soul. It felt like a darkness that seemed to consume him. The silence in the house seemed to press in on him, making his days feel heavy and without purpose. This was an active manifestation of dukkha, the first noble truth of Buddhism, which speaks of the inherent presence of suffering in life. However, he knew that this wasn't the end of his path. It was just another bend in the road. One afternoon, at the community center, surrounded by familiar faces, but feeling more isolated than ever, he overheard a conversation that would change his future. A group of people were discussing the possibility of moving into a nursing home. It struck him like a bolt of lightning. Maybe this was the answer. Maybe this was a place where he could find peace and some semblance of connection. The next day, he called Adam, hoping he would understand. There was a long pause. "Dad, are you sure you want to move into a nursing home? Doesn't that place feel cold?" Adam asked, his voice full of concern. "Adam, it's not about the coldness. It's about finding a place where I can be at peace for the long term. You and Emily have your own busy lives. I don't want to be a burden to you. At least in a nursing home, there are people around." "I won't be so alone," Jack responded. He felt he was applying the Buddhist teachings of detachment, not indifference, but the ability to let go of certain attachments to maintain inner balance. He knew that moving to a nursing home would come with its own set of challenges, but he also recognized that it might offer a sense of community and support that he desperately needed at this stage of his life. Adam hesitated, and Jack could hear the worry in his voice. He promised to discuss it with Emily. A few days later, they came over, their faces drawn with concern. "Dad, we understand that it's hard for you to be on your own, but are you sure a nursing home is the right place? What if you feel more isolated there?" Emily asked, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to worry about me. I've thought this through. I need a place where I can enjoy my later years in peace. A nursing home isn't the worst option. It's not perfect, but it's better than being alone here. You both have your own lives to live, and I don't want to impose on that." After a long pause, they agreed. "Dad, if this is what you want, we'll respect your choice, but we'll visit you often," Adam promised. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. He wasn't completely alone in this decision. He understood the value of respecting the choices of his family, and he appreciated the fact that they were attempting to honor his wishes, even though they had different opinions. A few months later, Jack moved into a nursing home in the suburbs. It was a beautiful place with flower gardens, activity rooms, and plenty of other seniors around his age. On his first day, he met Mr. Robinson, a long-term resident, who welcomed him with a warm smile and offered to show him around. He introduced him to a few new faces, making the transition a little easier. That evening, as he lay in his new bed, gazing out the window at the night sky, he felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't home, and it wasn't the life he had envisioned, but it was a new beginning. He had made a few new friends, and the prospect of companionship eased the weight of his loneliness. The nursing home was more than just a place to stay. It was becoming his new Sangha, a community where he could find shared purpose, support, and connection. He found solace in the shared experiences of the residents, where conversations about life, love, and loss were not just words but a lived reality. 6 months passed, and Jack found his routine. He ate regularly, exercised, and socialized with his new friends. He no longer faced the crushing solitude he had once feared. He had found a new rhythm, a new sense of purpose. Though it wasn't the life he had imagined, it was one he could live with, peaceful, connected, and for the first time in a long while, filled with hope. Life had become a peaceful rhythm, filled with the simplicity of small pleasures, playing chess, enjoying the quiet moments, and chatting with friends. These small daily routines had become his sanctuary. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of comfort and security that had been absent for years. Adam and Emily, his children, still called frequently, their voices filled with concern about his adjustment, but Jack tried to reassure them. "I'm doing well. Nothing's missing. You don't need to worry about me," he would say. But deep down, he knew they couldn't fully understand the peace he had found. He had learned to embrace solitude, to feel grounded in it. But then, one afternoon, everything shifted. He was now understanding that the external environment wasn't the sole key to happiness. The true meaning was found in his own state of being. He had achieved the Buddhist concept of nirvana, a state of being free from suffering and attachment, finding a sense of inner peace no matter where he was. After a quiet lunch, sitting in the sun, letting the simplicity of the moment wash over him, the phone rang. It was Adam, his voice filled with urgency. "Dad, I've got some bad news," he said, his voice barely controlled. "Mrs. Robinson was in a car accident, and she's in the hospital." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. His heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. He had to steady himself. What happened? How is she? He stammered, his voice a mere whisper. I just got the news and rushed over, Adam responded. Do you want to come to the hospital? He felt as though the ground had disappeared. He had to get to her. He called the nursing home staff to arrange for transportation, his mind racing with uncontrolled thoughts. How could something so tragic happen to her? The last time he saw her, he had smiled and told her to take care of herself. The image of her smiling face haunted him. All he could think of was how fragile life truly was. This experience challenged Jack's understanding of the fourth noble truth, the path to the cessation of suffering. He had reached a place of relative peace, but the sudden tragedy with Mrs. Robinson was proof that life is unpredictable, and that even when you think you're on solid ground, you can be faced with unexpected challenges. At the hospital, he saw Adam and Emily standing outside the emergency room. The look on their faces, so deeply concerned, made everything feel too real. Adam helped him sit down, his hands shaking as he guided him to the chair. Dad, Adam said, his voice heavy with dread. The doctors are doing everything they can, but the situation isn't looking good. The weight of his words crushed Jack. He could barely look at him. He stared at the red light blinking above the surgical room door. All he could do was pray, hoping that Mrs. Robinson, this strong, resilient woman, would find a way to survive. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Then the door opened, and the doctor emerged. Jack almost lunged toward him, desperate for news, for a glimmer of hope. How is she? He asked, his voice a mere breath. The doctor's face was grim. The injuries are severe, he said softly. Prepare for the worst. The words were like a punch to the gut, leaving Jack breathless. He could barely hold himself upright. In that moment, he was also reminded of the Buddhist principle of karma, the idea that our actions and intentions create cause and effect. He realized that even though he had no direct influence over the car accident, he could choose how to respond to it, and he could fill that response with loving kindness, compassion, and acceptance. He could feel the world spinning, everything blurring into a fog. Then, moments later, a nurse emerged, pushing Mrs. Robinson's still form down the hall. His heart lurched as he saw her pale and unmoving. She had been so full of life, full of spirit, and now she looked so fragile, so helpless. The sight of her shattered something deep inside him. He reached out instinctively, taking her cold hand in his, feeling the contrast between her warmth and the ice-cold grip of her skin. Please, Mrs. Robinson, he whispered, his voice breaking, his eyes filled with tears. Please don't leave me. You promised we'd spend our lives together. You can't leave me now. For a moment, he thought she might hear him. Her eyes flickered open, but no words came. A single tear escaped her eye, and it felt like a dagger to his heart. In that instant, Jack's world crumbled. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling, tears falling uncontrollably. Please, he cried, don't go. I can't live without you. If you leave me, I don't know what I'll do. Adam and Emily stood silently by, their faces etched with sadness, with the same helplessness that overwhelmed him. They knew there was nothing they could say to ease the pain. That night, the doctor confirmed the worst. Mrs. Robinson's condition had worsened. She was now critical. Jack stayed by her side, hoping, praying. At one point, her eyes flickered open again, her cold hand reaching for his. He held it tightly. Her grip tightened, and she struggled, her breath shallow and labored. He could see the fight in her face. "Mr. Thompson, live well," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. And then, with one final exhale, her hand relaxed and her eyes closed for the last time. He understood that this moment was about letting go. Not forgetting, but accepting that life continues and transitions and that everything changes. She had found her peace, and he knew that she wouldn't have wanted him to stay in pain. A part of Jack wanted to scream, to beg her to wake up. But she was gone. In that painful silence, he was paralyzed by the crushing weight of the moment. His heart felt as though it had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Mrs. Robinson was more than just a friend. She was the last person who had truly cared about him, who had loved him unconditionally, and now she was gone. The world seemed crueler, colder, and he was left to stumble through the days that followed in a haze, in a darkness that clung to him, smothering any chance of joy or peace. The grief was suffocating, and no matter how many people tried to comfort him, it only seemed to make the loneliness worse. The raw intensity of the pain he felt forced him to confront some difficult truths. It served as a reminder that attachment to anything, even a loving companionship, can be a source of suffering. He recognized that the only constant in life is change, and he knew that he needed to adapt once again. In the nursing home, the days blurred together. Everything seemed so empty without her, like there was no purpose to the hours that stretched before him. His friends noticed the change. They sat with him, but no words could heal the wound that had been carved into his heart. At their age, losses are more than just memories. They are parts of ourselves, pieces of our soul that are irreplaceable. Once something is gone, it remains forever empty. Adam and Emily came often, bringing their children, hoping their laughter might lighten his spirit, but his heart was a fortress locked behind walls of sorrow. The silence between them grew louder. It was a constant reminder of the space Mrs. Robinson had left behind. He could see that they were trying to help, but he knew that some grief could only be truly understood and carried by the one who was experiencing it. He knew that he needed to embark on the difficult path of self-healing. One afternoon, Adam sat beside him, his face etched with concern. He couldn't understand why Jack was still grieving, why he hadn't been able to move on. "Dad, please don't be sad anymore. Mrs. Robinson wouldn't want you to feel like this," Adam said, his words filled with love, yet they stung. "Adam, there are things you just can't put into words." Jack responded, "Letting go isn't easy. You and Emily are still young. You're still finding your way. But when someone you love with all your heart is suddenly gone, it feels like the sky itself has fallen, like everything you've ever known is slipping through your fingers." Adam went quiet, sensing the weight of his words. Then he reached for Jack's hand. "Dad, you still have us, your children, and your grandchildren. We'll always be here for you." His words, as comforting as they were, couldn't fill the void. "I know you care, Adam," Jack said softly, "but sometimes the emptiness in your heart is something only you can truly understand." The Buddhist understanding of dukkha suffering made him understand that every individual's experience of grief is unique. He realized that Adam was doing his best to offer support, but that true healing would only come from within. He needed to not only accept his grief, but also to embrace it as an essential aspect of the human experience. A few days later, as Jack walked through the garden, trying to lose himself in the quiet beauty of nature, he saw a new resident, an older man, his face etched with sorrow, his eyes heavy with the same loneliness that had plagued Jack when he first arrived. He felt a pang of recognition, a connection to the man's pain. He walked over, placing his hand on his shoulder. "Are you new here?" he asked. "Would you like to take a walk with me?" The man looked at him, and though he didn't speak, Jack saw the gratitude in his eyes. They walked side by side, neither of them speaking, but there was a silent understanding between them, a recognition of the shared weight of their years and their losses. They were both just souls wandering through the final chapters of their lives, finding what comfort they could in the company of one another. It was a profound manifestation of compassion, the willingness to ease the suffering of another being, a recognition that they were not alone in their journey. He understood that sharing in silence could be just as powerful as sharing through words. That night, as Jack lay in bed, he thought of Mrs. Robinson again. Her voice, so soft and kind, seemed to echo in his mind. Her smile, her gentle touch, had become the most precious memories of his life. And now, they were all he had left of her. It was hard to imagine a life without her in it, but as he closed his eyes, he realized something. Even though she was gone, a part of her would always be with him. Her love, her care, her kindness had left an indelible mark on his heart, a mark that could never be erased. And for the first time in a long time, as he lay there in the quiet, the weight of his loneliness didn't feel so heavy. It wasn't gone, but it had softened. Maybe, just maybe, that was enough. He finally began to understand that love doesn't end with death, but transforms into a guiding light, offering comfort, guidance, and warmth even when the physical presence is no longer there. It was his understanding of sunyata, or emptiness, that helped him appreciate that loss doesn't negate love, but is just another aspect of the flow of existence. The presence of love continues to remain in the world, even when that person is no longer physically present. Although Mrs. Robinson's passing plunged him into deep sorrow, the lessons she imparted during her life will remain etched in his heart. She taught him the importance of cherishing every relationship, whether it's with family, friends, or even fleeting acquaintances. These bonds fill the empty spaces in our hearts, making life meaningful. Each relationship is a thread in the tapestry of our lives, woven together by shared moments, laughter, struggles, and love. And without these, Jack knew our existence would be emptier. It was the practice of bodhicitta, which inspired him to not just seek his own enlightenment, but to also consider and honor the lives and experiences of others. Every interaction was an opportunity for connection, growth, and shared learning. These bonds are the anchors that ground us in a world where everything is transient. The morning after her passing, standing in the garden, the sun warm on his face, his heart empty, Jack understood nothing in this life lasts forever. But the love we share, the moments we create, will always remain. They live on in our hearts, and when life's storms hit, they serve as a reminder that we have loved deeply, given a piece of ourselves to others. And that love, despite the passing of time, endures. This, he realized, is spiritual strength, what carries us through the hardest times. It is the internal fortitude fueled by our love for others and the deep connections we build that propels us forward. It's the understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings, a fundamental concept of Buddhism, that made him realize that his experiences were not just personal. It was a part of a greater tapestry of human experiences. His sorrow, while deeply personal, was also a universal feeling, and he found solace in the shared humanity. The great Japanese author, Haruki Murakami, once said, "I always thought that people age slowly. In reality, people don't just age. In a moment, in the blink of an eye, a day has passed, a year has ended, and in the blink of an eye, a lifetime has gone by. Don't think you're still young. One day, you suddenly realize that your youth is no longer there. The first gray hairs appear, and your face begins to show small wrinkles. Time slips by unnoticed, and as you age, you realize that the noise of the world grows quieter, not because there's nothing left to say, but because there's nothing more that needs to be said. People, in their own way, begin to understand that silence often speaks louder than words. How many truly understand the depth of your journey? Few, if any. We are all walking our own path through life, and at some point, we realize we can only take our own journey. And at times, you may feel as though no one is truly listening, but perhaps that is okay. The words of comfort often mask the deeper truth, the truth we are unwilling to confront. So you choose silence. It is in that stillness that you find clarity, a deeper connection with yourself. Only then can you hear your heart, your true thoughts, without the interference of others. He realized that the silence that had once felt like a burden was now a tool for self-discovery and an integral part of the Buddhist meditation practice. It was a space where he could connect with his inner self and cultivate mindfulness. Adversity often feels more prevalent than any advantage we might possess. Life is full of struggles, and sometimes it seems as though failure is the only option. But through all of it, we learn to accept that there are forces beyond our control, and in that acceptance, there is peace. You begin to realize that as long as you've given your best effort, you can hold your head high, free from shame. The self-respect you gain is not one of pride, but of humility. You recognize the goodness within you, but instead of allowing it to inflate your ego, you carry it with grace. Humility becomes a part of your essence, and in turn, it makes you even more worthy of respect. It's through this realization that we begin to understand the Buddhist principle of non-attachment. Not a rejection of life, but a recognition that everything, including success and failure, is impermanent. This allows us to navigate life's ups and downs with a more balanced and peaceful state of mind. As time passes, you can't help but notice the changes within yourself. They are subtle, almost imperceptible at times, but they are undeniable. You've transformed with age, and while the world continues to change around you, one thing becomes clear: you have become more than you ever thought possible. The years, the struggles, the joys, they have shaped you, and now you are stronger, wiser, and more aware of the beauty that life has to offer, no matter how fleeting. In the realm of Buddhist teaching, we understand this as the evolution of consciousness. It is the natural unfolding of life that leads us to a greater understanding of ourselves and the interconnected nature of the world. Old age has been a relentless teacher, reshaping my spirit, deepening my understanding of life, and most profoundly, transforming my view of love. I once thought love was simple and pure, something that could be captured in the image of two people holding hands, never letting go, and growing old together side by side forever. I believed that love was the anchor that would keep us grounded, and that nothing could shake it, no matter how time passed. However, through time, Jack discovered that the concept of love was far more complex. But as the years have unfolded, I've come to see the truth, a bittersweet truth. Many relationships are fleeting, like the petals of a flower that bloom brightly, but fade all too quickly. They are temporary, often more about the moments we share than the eternity we once imagined. Life moves so swiftly that the past, present, and future begin to blur together. We realize, with a quiet ache, that the people who once felt so irreplaceable, those who seemed like the pillars of our lives, have either changed or drifted away. Even the most cherished memories, once vibrant and full of life, begin to lose their color with time. It's a profound recognition of the Buddhist teaching of impermanence, that all things are constantly changing, and that holding on to the past leads to suffering. He was learning to appreciate the beauty and lessons each encounter brought, without clinging to them. The more you live, the more you come to understand that life, in all its beautiful complexity, can be both a source of joy and deep sorrow. There are times when accepting this truth feels impossible. In the depths of your soul, you struggle to make peace with it. Yet, there's an undeniable calm that comes with the realization that not everything is meant to remain unchanged. Some things, once perfect in our eyes, simply lose their luster, and we have no choice but to let them go. This was an active application of equanimity, which, in Buddhism, isn't about indifference. It is about learning to appreciate every experience, positive or negative, for what it is, without becoming too attached to it. The things that once bothered you, the moments you would have spent criticizing or trying to change, start to fade into the background. You realize that some things just are, and no amount of wishing can alter their existence. Life doesn't ask for permission to change, it simply does. People will disappoint you, and you will disappoint yourself. It's hard to accept, but the truth is that we sometimes give too much of ourselves to others, and in return, we end up feeling empty, as though our kindness was taken for granted. People who once needed you now think your love and care are guaranteed, as though it's something they can always rely on. He understood the practice of mindfulness, not to dwell on negative feelings, but to acknowledge them without being consumed by them. I've learned sometimes painfully that I must treat myself with more kindness. I must guard my heart more fiercely, and when necessary, be a little colder towards others to preserve my well-being. As time marches on, you begin to see that disappointment isn't just a fleeting feeling, it's a constant companion in the journey of life. The more you pour your heart into something, the more vulnerable you become to being let down. And yet, there's a strange beauty in that vulnerability, because it reminds you that you're still alive, still hoping, still reaching for something better. It's understanding that every person is responsible for their own happiness, and that true self-love begins with honoring your own needs. With time, I've come to realize that it's foolish to place all your hopes in one place. Hope, though powerful, can also be a source of deep disappointment. It's in this realization that you begin to learn the delicate dance of hope and acceptance. There are moments when you must push forward with all your might, but there are others when you must know when to step back, take a breath, and simply let things unfold. The secret is learning how to balance the two, hope and disappointment, and when you do, you stop worrying so much about the outcome. What truly matters is not what you gain or lose, but how you carry yourself through it all, and how you keep moving forward with grace, no matter the challenges life throws your way. This was an embodiment of the middle path, the Buddhist teaching of avoiding extremes, finding a balance that leads to peace and contentment. In the end, after everything, after all the love, loss, hope, and disappointment, I've come to understand one profound truth. The only way to avoid true failure is to rely on yourself. While it's comforting to have the support of others, there's a deeper, quieter strength that comes from being self-sufficient, from knowing that in the end, you are the one who will always be there for you. When the world feels uncertain, and when you have no one else to turn to, you'll discover just how strong you truly are. This is the moment when you rise, not because you have to, but because you realize you've always had the strength within you, and that more than anything else is the most precious gift you can give yourself. It was discovering the Buddhist concept of self-reliance and how that could empower him to take charge of his own life, to create meaning and purpose despite the circumstances. This wasn't about being selfish, but about honoring his own worth and potential. As we reach the end of this reflection, I invite you to think deeply about what you've learned from these life lessons. Jack's story teaches us so much about love, loss, hope, and the incredible strength that lies within us. What has resonated with you the most today? What one lesson will you take with you, and how do you plan to put it into practice in your own life? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share one thing you've learned and how it will influence your actions moving forward in the comments below. Your insights can inspire and encourage others who are on the same journey. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I urge you to explore the Buddhist path, not because it's the right way, but because it is a path that resonates with the depths of your own soul, which may guide you towards peace, compassion, and understanding. Remember that the journey is never truly over. It only continues with new layers, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. And with that comes newfound wisdom to not just be better for yourself, but for others.